administration announced last week that it's requesting $842 billion for the Pentagon budget. It's one of the largest budget requests ever. Despite this already massive number, every year DoD pushes to get even more money by using unfunded priority lists, or what I call wish lists, that don't go through the other budgeting screens. The services and combatant commands ask Congress for billions more in funding for programs from these lists. Other federal agencies have to balance their must-haves and their nice-to-haves, but DoD doesn't. Instead, it games the system by submitting a second list of items that they want so that their budget can grow even bigger. I know that there are colleagues on both sides of the aisle who are concerned about this and want to see this practice stop. Last year, both your predecessors at AFRICOM and CENTCOM submitted these wish lists. So what I'm asking today is about whether you plan to do the same. General Langley, AFRICOM requested an additional $353.6 million in unfunded priorities last year. In its submission, AFRICOM argued that if some of these programs weren't funded, it would result in, quote, unacceptable risk. So my question is, this year, will AFRICOM be putting all of its priority projects, if it's that important, if it's putting us at unacceptable risk, will you put that into your base budget request?
Senator, and just to be transparent, I will be submitting a unfunded priority list, and here's why: because of the emergent threats. When President Biden directed us back in last May to return to a persistent presence in Somalia, and I took command a few months after that, and I asked, being a former programmer, I said, okay, what is the fully burdened cost? I need to communicate to Congress what the fully burdened cost. I need to communicate to the department first. And I did that. I did that after budget submittal from the services to the department. So that emergent cost was informed by the risk that we have.
So you're telling me that this request, the ink is not dry on the budget request from Congress and from the president, and you're already saying that you know that it's not enough. And I want to remind you about emerging threats. DoD already has transfer and reprogramming authorities to deal with emerging threats. You have the ability to come back to Congress if you can justify an emerging threat. We have a panel looking at whether or not there are more changes that are needed. But these unfunded priority lists are just another way to game the system. If it is a priority to cover something like this, then I think you should be covering it. So are you telling me that the only things that will be on your unfunded priority list are things you couldn't have known about when you submitted your budget?
Senator, even my predecessor also put the other piece of that cost on there on ISR. We never had enough.
I'm not hearing a yes or no. Are you telling me that your unfunded budget priority list will have nothing on it except things that you could not have known about when you submitted your budget?
There is a persistent threat that we have to account for. So on that list,
that's
it will
what your
that.
budget is for, accounting for the persistent threat. Let me ask General Kurilla the same. Last year, CENTCOM submitted a request for $35 million in its unfunded priority list. Are you planning to submit a wish list again this year?
Senator, I am, but on last year's, I'm the one who signed last year's. That was for the massive ordnance penetrator for heavy, deeply buried targets. I do not have procurement dollars in my baseline budget. That is why I requested it.
So what you're really telling me is that this unfunded priority list is just a way to say I need a bigger base budget.
I don't have that color of money, Senator, to ask to request that. But on what I do as a commander is I mitigate risk, and I go through my priorities and the missions I have, and then when I have any risk left over, by the law, I will submit per the UPL.
You know, look, I appreciate this. You all know I have raised this issue before. If we're going to have a budget, we ought to have a budget. And there's no reason that DoD shouldn't be able to work within the budgeting process like every other part of government. I'm out of time on this, but I'm going to be submitting more questions for the record, Mr. Chairman, on what these commands are doing to prevent civilian harm. DoD is on the right path, but I remain concerned about whether or not we're getting accurate and honest reporting. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Warren. Senator Mullin, please.
Thank
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you both for being here.